Many of Jesus' teachings were done by parables, and oftentimes he would take modern day illustrations to provide a spiritual application to make it easier on the people to understand. And so I thought it would be good for us to go through some of these parables. We won't go through all of them, but we'll go through some of the ones that I myself have not ever really preached on before. And today we're going to talk about the tares in the field. Matthew 13, verses 24 through 30. When you think about the word parable, there are multiple definitions that one could use. There is the definition that says it's a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson as told by Jesus in the gospel. Or you might know the definition from Engraving Heavenly Truths, an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And both definitions would be correct. And there is truly so much that we can learn from each parable. It is amazing how often one can find good Bible doctrine in a passage that they've only studied once before, and they discover something else. And parables are something that deserve our attention, whether we've studied them before or not. And so we're going to look at 3 points this morning in our parable of the tares in the field. And the first point is the problem that comes up. I'm told that the good man sowed good seed, first of all. Another parable he put forth to them, Matthew 13:24. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. The seed is not the issue. The sower is not the issue. Both did their jobs properly. Both are good. And since the Jews were so interested in the kingdom, it is logical that Matthew would include what Jesus said about the kingdom. You might remember that the Jews were this mentality of, we want to have a king, and we want to have this kingdom. We want to be reestablished as a world power, because at one time, that's exactly what they were. There was a time in the world's history when the Jews were unbeatable, when no one could have defeated them, when no one could have had any hope to stand against them because God was on their side. And so the Jewish mindset, though, at times was that the kingdom would still be earthly. It wouldn't be heavenly, but earthly. And Jesus is including some parables of illustration on the kingdom itself. The seed is good, and the man sowing the seed is interested in a productive crop. What farmer isn't? I have never known of a farmer to say, well, I hope my crops don't grow properly this year. I hope we have a really bad storm that wipes out all the crops that I have been planting. Never known of a farmer to say that. They want the crop to be productive, and no doubt this man wants his seed that is growing to be productive. But then I'm told that an enemy snuck in and put tares. It's a weed that resembles wheat when it's young, and he put that among the good seed. What that indicates is that when the sower would go out to check on the crop, or his servants, as we'll find in just another verse, when they would go to look at the crop, in its early stages, they'd have no reason to fear, because as the tare is early in its stage of growth, it looks just like the wheat that's been planted next to it. But then I'm told that this enemy decided to do this because he wanted to cause some strife, right? I've never known of an enemy to sow tares or to do something to someone with good intention. This man did not sow these tares among the field to be nice. This man was competitive, perhaps, and decided to sabotage his neighbor's crop to keep him from reaping much produce so that his own crop would be worth more. Imagine if all of the soda companies died but Pepsi. I really hope that doesn't happen, but imagine if it did. Who would have the monopoly on soda? You want a Coke? Well, you want a Pepsi now. You want a soft drink? You're going to have to go with what Pepsi provides. That's essentially the idea that's presented here. Perhaps this man thought, if I can kill this man's crop, when the time comes to sell my crop, it will be more profitable and I'll make more money. Perhaps he just hated this individual, though. We're not really told the reasoning behind why he did what he did, just that he did it. And this enemy has now destroyed this crop. I'm then told in the next verse that the tares seemingly devalued the good seed. When the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. Imagine the distraught felt by the farmer when he realized that the tares were wrapped around the wheat. All that he had done, all that he had worked to do with the precautions that he took, and the servants come back and tell him, we found something and we don't think you're going to like it. A farmer depends on his crops for his livelihood, for his way of living. And to be told that it was ruined would be devastating. And seemingly, the good seed has now been devalued by what has been done by this enemy. But we find a solution to this problem in the next few verses. I first find that evil is recognizable. In verse 27, the servants of the owner came and said, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How does it have tares? How is it possible that it has weeds when you sowed good seed? We know that you did the right thing. It doesn't take long for people to recognize a bad crop. It really doesn't. And these servants had recognized the crop, and they're wanting to know how to fix the problem. And they want to fix the problem quickly. They want to fix it right now. I'm told, though, that the solution to what do we do is not a quick fix. I need to hear these verses more in my life because I am the type of person that when I find some problem, I've got to fix it. And I will fix it, and I will work until it is fixed. And that doesn't always go over well. I have this mindset that if there's a problem, it's a problem, and it needs to go away. Whereas others can have the mindset of, we can deal with that another day. Sometimes more damage is done by fixing a problem quickly than by taking your time. Notice what this farmer says to his servants. They say that an enemy, or I should say the servants first tell him an enemy has done this. After he was telling them this, they said, well, do you want us to go gather them up? No. Verse 29 says, lest while you gather up the tares, you're also uprooting the wheat also. Servants, if you go and you gather the tares right now, you're going to run the risk of destroying the crop that we've planted. You're going to run the risk of absolutely destroying all the hard work that we've done. And so what I want you to do is I want you to allow them to grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles and burn them, but gather the wheat in my barn. So here's the solution: patience. Allow them both to grow together, and then when they're full grown, you'll be able to take the tares and the wheat at the same time and separate the two, and you will be able to save the crop. Evidently, waiting to solve the problem was the right choice. I need to learn to sometimes wait, be patient, and trust that God will work it out for good. If I am to believe, according to Daniel 5:44, that God rules in the kingdoms of men, how could I not believe that he also rules in the church and in Christianity, and that God has a plan, and that God will work it out? There are TV shows that depict people who are very, very smart, and they come up with some plan on the fly. We have known of the TV show, and it's recently come back on the air, but remember MacGyver? What was MacGyver so famous for being able to do? But take duct tape and a piece of string and defuse a bomb with it, or something else along that line. Every episode would depict him in some fashion finding a solution to the problem in the most unorthodox of ways. But he would fix the problem. God's not MacGyver, though. God doesn't have to sit there and go, okay, how am I going to fix this? God already knows the solution. He already knows what's going to happen. I'm the one that's tasked with sitting back and trusting that it'll work out. But if I try to MacGyver it on my own, and I try to fix the problem on my own, and I don't let God be involved in the problem solving, I might cause more harm than good. And that's what the servants were told. Let them grow together, and then we'll gather them up. What about the meaning of this parable? First, I want you to notice that parables serve a purpose. There was never anything that Jesus did that didn't have a meaning behind it, that didn't have a purpose behind it, that didn't have some type of relevance behind it. And I'm told in Matthew 13, verses 10 through 16, that the disciples asked Jesus, why do you speak to them in parables? And Jesus' response is very interesting. He says, well, it's been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it's not been given. They don't know the mysteries. And so I speak in parables because seeing they do not see and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. Hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing. Their eyes have they closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn so that I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Have you ever had a situation where you used the phrase, explain that to me like I'm a child? Right? We are all about simplifying things when it comes to knowledge. If I talk to somebody about something I don't understand and I say, can you explain it to me like I'm a child? If they do their job properly, I should be able to walk away from that conversation knowing how to easily do what we were discussing. My wife, when she was in nursing school, was learning some of the most complex things that you could possibly learn. And so she would ask me from time to time, can I study with you? And I would say, what do you want to do? And she would just say, well, let me teach it to you. Okay, I think that'll work. So we would sit down at the table and she would begin to start teaching me. And after the first word, I was lost. Had no idea what she was talking about. And I just kind of stared at her. And halfway through the conversation, I said, honey, could you explain this to me like I'm 3 years old? Is that possible? I'll try. So she did, and I was just as lost. Had no idea what she was talking about. And I said, I'm sorry, I have no idea where you're going with this. And she said, well, the good news is you don't have to. Just let me speak to you. So I gladly gazed off into the distance toward her while she told me all that she needed to tell me. And she learned what she needed to know. I didn't grasp it, didn't understand it. It was just way over my head. And that's okay. But there are some things that don't need to be unreachable, that don't need to be unobtainable. And the kingdom of heaven is one of them. And Jesus understood that the people needed an easy way to understand what was coming and what was going to come. And parables, parabolic teaching is one of the best ways that Jesus found to do it. And so parables absolutely have a purpose. Today we might use illustrations like the one I just used about being my wife to try to help it make sense to the congregation or to the audience that you're speaking to in that moment. And it's similar, in a similar mindset to a parable in the sense of you're telling a story about something that happened to get an ultimate point across at the end of that story. And that's all parables were doing. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Parables have meaning. If I can tell you one of the greatest compliments you can ever give a gospel preacher, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. The greatest compliment a gospel preacher can ever get is the following: you make it very simple to understand. That seems very trivial to be told, and it almost might come across in someone's mind as a backhanded compliment. Well, you make it so simple. You're just a simple preacher. But that's what I want to be. I'm glad being a simple preacher if that's what you think. If someone can take away from a message that I preach or that Ryan preaches or that any gospel preacher would deliver, if they can take away from it simple truths about God's word, that preacher has done his job properly. And no one could have ever said about Jesus' teachings through parables that they didn't get the message. They didn't understand necessarily, unless they really tried to not understand. God's message and his messenger, Christ, in this moment, made it simple for people to understand. And in that regard, Jesus did the greatest service in preaching that he could do for those people. What good would it do this congregation for me to get up and to use big words that no one knows without defining them, and to speak in such long-winded sentences and not try to get to the heart of the matter as quickly as possible? What good does that do the congregation? Or what good does it do anybody? I was told in school, take on the attitude and the personality of the congregation where you preach. If you preach in a congregation that is more country, you don't need to be prim and proper when you speak. However, I've also known of people who work near a university and they have professors who attend their services every single Sunday. And I mean, the majority of that congregation would be professors. Well, that individual might need to step up his game a little bit more and be a little bit more eloquent at times so that the people there will understand it as well too, and he can get on their level. But there is no greater compliment for a gospel preacher than to be told, I can understand what you're saying. And when you teach, I know exactly the message that you're giving. Because that means we're doing our job properly. What is the meaning of this parable, though? We've talked about the parable itself, but how can we define it? Matthew 13, 36 through 43 gives us the meaning of the parable. And I want to first look at the participants of the parable. You have the sower. Jesus says that is the Son of Man. The sower is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the sons of the kingdom. The tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy, you guessed it, the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Those are the participants of this parable. And that's what they mean. But then he goes on to give the actual meaning of what he just said. And here it is in verses 41 through 43. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. What am I to take from this but that apparently the righteous ones can be infiltrated by the wicked, and both could be in the same field, planted and growing together? Isn't it true that right now, at this very moment, some act of wickedness is being done? Isn't it true that right now, at this very moment, there are people who are even plotting and planning some act of wickedness that they can do? It's very likely. How then can I make it with the tares that are around me in this world? You let them grow together, and you understand that the evil is taken away. The evil goes away. Brother, no matter how good we are, evil still exists. And no matter how good you're going to be, evil still exists in this world. And that could be a very big discouragement to any one of us. You can allow yourself to become discouraged like those servants were discouraged when they see the tares and the wheat together and they're saying, how do we need to pluck these out, right? How do we get rid of it? Let them grow together. The wheat had been planted in good seed, right? It was good seed, good field. It grew well, didn't it? It did what it was supposed to do. The tares tried to do what they were designed to do, which is be a weed that destroyed the wheat. But it didn't work. When the harvest time came, the wheat was gathered easily, separated from the tares, and the tares were gathered up and burned. No matter how good we are, evil still exists. But I'm to be set apart from the world, Romans 12:1 and 2. I'm to be different from this world. I'm to be someone who, when someone sees me, they recognize that I'm different. They can understand that I'm different. We talk about elders' qualifications being one of them, that he must have a good report of those who are without. And what do we mean by that? But that an elder's name, if brought up at the local community restaurant, that people who know him could say, that's a good man. We really respect him. We're blessed to have known him. Imagine being at a local restaurant and saying the elder's name and hearing, I'm sorry, did you just say that name? Yeah, he stole thousands of dollars from me, and he never paid it back. You know he cheated on his wife too. You know that he did all this thing. It was horrible. He's an elder in the congregation where you work. Is that man fit to stay an elder? Not if those things are true. Must have a good report of them who are without. But is it just elders that have to have a good report of those who are without? It's all of us. You may not be qualified to be an elder, but it doesn't give you the excuse to be a rotten person in the community or to be a rotten person in general. And when people hear your name, they cringe and think, great, that person's coming. Just because evil exists does not give us the right to be evil too. You might know of illustrations along this line, but everybody else is doing it, right? So why can't I? And wouldn't it be easy for us to have that mentality about this world? To see all the weeds that are growing up around us and to say, they're doing it, why can't I? Because we're different. The tares only resembled what wheat looked like. They weren't wheat. They were not going to be gathered at the harvest time and kept. They are going to be burned. So I'm to be different from this world. Something else to take away is that evil is often done secretly. There are things that get done without our consent in this world that we don't like, that are pushed through without our knowledge. No one can really read the bill that's about to be passed or whatever you may have, and so all of a sudden it's passed. And the nation realizes what's in it, and we get angry. Evil is often done secretly. This enemy did not stop by the farmer's house and say, hey, I'm here to plant some tares in your field. I hope that's okay. That going to be okay? Can you give me about 5 minutes and I'll be done? It's not what he did. He went secretly to do such. And I'm never going to know, you're never going to know the true amount of evil that's in this world. There will be things that will be done in secret that we won't know about in this life. So again, isn't it easy to be discouraged? To know that we're supposed to be growing just easily, but there's something that's around us to try to prevent our growth, something that's trying to prohibit us from being the best Christian, the best individual that we can be. Shouldn't that discourage us, and can't it discourage us to the point where we just give up? Final lesson: the wicked ultimately lose. Movies are made about this. Books, TV shows about this enemy who is so daunting, who is so wonderful of an enemy in the sense that he is perfect to be an enemy. Man, he fits the bill. And he's unbeatable. And you watch or you read or you listen and you think, how are they going to do it? How are they going to win? How is it possible? But good triumphs over evil. I will never forget the very first time I watched Rocky with my dad. And it's been out for 40 plus years, so I'm not going to spoil it for you. If you haven't seen it yet, that's kind of on you, I guess. Rocky loses in the first movie. I remember looking at Dad and going, that's it? He lost? Why did he lose? He's supposed to win. We just spent 2 hours watching this guy progress as a character and watching him get to the final fight, and he lost? I watched a video just yesterday about this. They wanted him to win. And Sylvester Stallone, the one who played Rocky and directed the movie, said, no, I have to lose. Why? Because that's not what we expect to happen. And life isn't fair. And sometimes you lose, but you got to get back up. Now, we all expected the other guy to lose because he's been painted as the antagonist of the movie. And when he won, people were shocked. Same things have happened on and on since then, and you can count them really on your hands. How many times the enemy wins? It's a rare occurrence because typically speaking, we want to see good triumph over evil. We want to see the good guy win. Could you imagine if you were reading this book and you got to Revelation and the verse read at the very end of the book, and so Satan had victory over all of mankind and of God? Could you imagine that verse? What would you want to say at that point? But what's the point of doing what this says if the devil's going to win in the end? What's the point of planting a crop if the tares are just going to come and destroy the crop in the end? We might as well quit and give up. Or you realize that the wicked ultimately lose. This crop, the tares that were around it, were burned. You remember that the tares are gathered up and burned, right? They're not replanted. They're not kept for any type of purpose. They're destroyed. So who's really the winner on Judgment Day? The world that's been increasingly wicked, or the righteous? You ever noticed how a lot of the movies love to stack the odds against the hero? Thousands upon thousands of people on the enemy's army, and only a couple hundred on another. Or this big, mighty foe, and he's fighting this tiny little guy. And you sit there and think, there's no way he's going to win. How could he? Well, Goliath didn't think David was going to win either, and he did. Whether Hollywood likes to admit it or not, much of their profit has come from using biblical themes. Good triumphs over evil. No matter how big and bad the enemy is, no matter how formidable of an opponent he is, good still wins, no matter what. And what I'm told in this passage is that good still wins. We've got to keep our eye on the prize, though. What happened to Peter, Matthew 14:28 through 31, when he walked out onto the water and he's looking at Jesus and he's walking, and then all of a sudden he starts to realize, uh-oh, I'm standing on water and the waves are crashing around and the storm and all that. And what happened when he took his eyes off of Jesus but that he began to sink? And that Jesus had to help him out and put him back in the boat. If I take my eyes off the prize because I get so discouraged that evil seemingly is winning all of the time, I am ignoring what this parable teaches. That the wicked don't win in the end. Oh, it looks like they're going to win. I understand. But they're not. The whole book of Revelation is a victory book that tells us how we win and how the devil is defeated. Same principle applied here in Matthew 13:24-30. The parables of Jesus are so important to us. They need to be. They've got to be. They're not hard to understand. It just takes a little bit of digging and looking into from time to time. But today, my question is, are you wheat or a tare? And really think about it. Are you the type of person who, when the judgment day comes, you're going to be gathered up and burned? Or are you going to be gathered to go to heaven, to be with Jesus forever, because you lived a faithful life in spite of all of the other things that were going on around you? You said, no, I'm different, I'm set apart, so I will be different. Are you wheat or a tare? Only you and God really know that answer. But I can tell you this much. Harvest time doesn't have a date on it. I don't know when it's coming. But the harvest is coming. And when the harvest came for that wheat, the tares met their demise. When the harvest comes for our Christians in our world, the wicked, the unrighteous, those without Christ, those who do not seek to do what Christ says, they will be destroyed, and they'll meet their demise. If you have a need this morning, whether it's to come forward and be baptized for the remission of your sins, 1 Peter 3:21, or whether it is simply to come back to God, to rededicate your life to Him, to turn away from sin and wickedness and to be righteous again, won't you please come right now as together we stand and sing?